Today I'm turning you from a Factorio smelting noob into a true smelting god. But wait, I'm also gonna explain and give you a ton of blueprints so you'll never have to build another boring smelting array ever again. And we're starting right now. Before we jump into the world of designs, let's first understand what smelting is. It's the process of converting raw ores into processed material, and for that, we are going to need furnaces. We have a total of 3 different furnaces in Factorio. The very first furnace you're going to use is a stone furnace. It's very cheap to make, but also very slow and consumes a lot of fuel. As you can see, it takes about 3 seconds for this furnace to create 1 iron plate. That's a long time. Let's move on to the second furnace. This is the steel furnace. It's a bit more expensive to make, not much, but it is much faster, twice faster to be exact. And interestingly, it consumes the same amount of fuel as the stone furnace to convert the same amount of ore into processed material. One important point before we move on is that these 2 furnaces are of the same size, and that becomes very crucial when we are upgrading our smelting columns. Finally, let's move on to the most advanced furnace. This is the electric furnace. It's not cheap, and it comes much later down the road where we have the blue science. It has the same speed as the steel furnace, but consumes electricity instead of coal. One other thing to notice is that this one is a bit bigger than our previous 2 furnaces. It occupies a 3x3 grid, and this makes upgrading from steel furnace to electric furnace a bit more challenging. But more on that later. There are 4 smeltable items in the vanilla game: iron ore to iron plate, copper ore to copper plate, stone to bricks, and finally, the exception here, iron plates into steel. You might be asking yourself, why do we need electric furnaces if the only difference is the energy source? Well, that's not the only difference. If you open up the electric furnace, you realize that it supports modules. This allows us for high efficiency, productivity, and speed depending on what you need. If you are interested to learn more about these different furnaces, take a look at this chart from Factorio.com. It shows the difference between coal consumption of the first 2 and the smelting speed of all 3 of them. Remember, you can always increase the speed of electric furnaces using modules and beacons. So let's take a look at how we use each furnace to smelt ore. First, we start with the stone furnace. But before we do, let's go and take a look at our smelting recipes. First is the iron plate. A smelter of any kind takes 1 iron ore in and returns 1 iron plate. The exact same thing is the case with copper plates. 1 copper ore and we get 1 copper plate. As you can see with the steel plates, the story is a bit different. First, we need to smelt 5 iron ores into 5 iron plates. Then we pass on those 5 iron plates into another smelter, which in turn will give us 1 steel plate. And finally, we have the stone bricks, which is a bit peculiar. Instead of 1, it takes 2 stone ores, or just stones, to create 1 stone brick. So we have to remember this when we design our smelting columns. Alright, so this is what we just talked about. Iron ores, copper ores into their respective plates. Then 2 stones at the same time becomes 1 brick. Then 5 iron ores go into this smelter to become iron plates, and then 5 of them will go into this smelter to become 1 steel plate. Interestingly, the time it takes to smelt 5 iron plates is the same time it takes to smelt 1 steel plate. So a 1:1 ratio is just fine. Even though higher tier smelters are faster, the ratios are the same. So as you can see, designs are very consistent. Alright, let's talk design. In the early game, stick with stone furnaces because they are dirt cheap. Just 5 stones and you have a stone furnace on your hand. Now the way you use a stone furnace is super easy. You just put it down and now you have to give it fuel and the ore you want to be smelted. So in this case, we put a belt on top, 1 over here, and as you can see, there is a gap between the belt and the furnace. Now all you need to do is to pick up an inserter, put it over here and here. This way, this inserter will give it the fuel and the ore, and this one will pick up the finished product. Now here's an interesting question. How do we use the single belt to provide both fuel and the ore? Well, let's assume this belt contains the coal and this belt contains the ore. Now if we go ahead and just activate these 2 magical undergrounds, we can see what happens. See, the coal comes down, the ore comes up, they join on the single belt, and the inserter is smart enough to know which items to pick up and put inside the furnace. As you can see, it is consuming the coal and smelting the iron ore. And whenever it's finished, the other insetter picks up the iron plate and puts it on the belt, and that is the simplest automation we can have for a furnace. Now, how can we turn this very simplistic design into something we can actually use in our game? This is a slightly refined version of what we have just designed. Except we can take this part and press V and then paste it here, which will double our capacity of smelting, just like that. Now you might wonder, what is this? And this is actually a mechanism that helps to split the ore and the coal on this mixed belt together. So let's take a closer look. We have two splitters here and then one belt going into separate directions in the middle. If we connect this will happen. As you can see, the iron will be divided into two and it will make half a belt of iron. And now if we connect this one, coal will take the place of the other half. And this is how you make a mixed belt for your furnaces. There's only a slight problem. The coal is kind of in the way. So let's do a little bit of tweaking. We take the coal from here, put it next to the iron, so they are both on the same side, and then we use an underground belt in order to take the coal all the way to the other side and into this splitter. And as you can see, the result is exactly the same. This way we get to build freely over here, as you can see in the original design right over here. Alright, it's time to test this little contraption and see if our design works. And as you can see, we have mixed belts and the smelters work just fine. Now the only problem we have is that these four furnaces cannot fully consume all the ore, so they cannot fully saturate this yellow belt. In order to solve this problem, we first have to understand how much these four furnaces are producing. As you can see, they all produce 1.25 iron plates per second. If we multiply this by 12 logs of 4, we will get 48 furnaces, which will fully saturate one yellow belt. If you don't know why 15 items per second can saturate a yellow belt, just move your mouse over the yellow belt and look at the right side. It says belt speed 15 items per second. Now here's a few tips if you're new to Factorio and this is your early game. You can always use constant combinators in your designs just to make sure you understand which input belongs to which item. Like this. Next tip is about the orientation of inputs and outputs. As you can see, they're all on the same side. But why? Before I explain, let's make a copy of this design and put it next to it. Okay, now let's change the direction of the output. It is very simple. All you need to do is to do this. Done. Now from here, you can choose to do different things with the iron plates or whatever plates that you are smelting. The problem is, later on in the game, you are not free to expand on this column. However, if you choose this design, you can always just expand it as you keep using the outputs on this side freely. Another advantage of this design is that it supports buffering without hindering growth. What does that mean? Early on in the game, you always have shortage of different types of plates. Therefore, it pays to be able to store them somewhere. To do that, you can always use a buffer design. Samples are provided here in the blueprint book. A buffer like this helps you store as much iron plates and other process materials as you go around creating different parts of your factory, and when you come back, you have a ton of items stored ready for use. And to be able to use such buffers, you need to be able to expand towards the other direction. Another early game tip would be try to put your smelting columns close to your mining operation. This way you can easily transfer the ore into the smelting column and then store whatever is processed on the outside. You might think that this is not a permanent design, and you are correct. Later, when you come up with the final design of your base, you can design the structure of your smelting according to that. For example, if you decide to go for a bus-based system, you can put your smelters in the beginning of the bus, and then you just train in the raw ore from distant patches. Alright, time for expansion. We just go into the blueprint section, early game, and there's a tileable design right here. What we have to do is to make this thing 48 furnaces large. As you can see, we have a total of 48 stone furnaces. Finally, now that all these stone furnaces are working, we have a full belt of iron plates. And as you know, copper and iron are very similar when it comes to smelting. So you can use the exact identical designs that you use for iron to also smelt copper. Now let's take a look at a design to smelt stone. As you can see, it's much shorter. In fact, it's half the size of iron and copper smelting column. Why? Because as you remember, each furnace requires 2 stone per brick. That's why we cannot support as many furnaces using the yellow belt. This setup only produces 7.5 bricks per second, or half a yellow belt to be exact. Finally, let's see a steel smelting design. As you can see, we need 2 rows of furnaces. The first row of furnaces processes the raw ore, and the second row of furnaces processes the iron plate into steel plates. This belt supports the fuel for the first line of furnaces, and this belt that's coming back supports the fuel for the second line. This tiny contraption right here has a filter on steel plates, so it makes sure nothing but steel can pass through. Finally, all the processed steel will be gathered here and directed towards the output. Alright, enough with the early game scenarios. Let's go into the mid game. At this point, you have red belts and you also have unlocked steel furnaces. Now, how do we upgrade this contraption into something more powerful? There are 2 ways, manual and bot-based. Let's start with the manual first. You're gonna have to pick up the steel furnace and go and manually place them down all over the place. Then, you're gonna have to pick up the red belt and do the same everywhere on your design. This is going to be easy, because steel furnaces occupy the same footprint as your stone furnaces. But the difference is huge. This column right now produces at twice the capacity as before, 30 plates per second for a full red belt. The second and easier way to upgrade would be to use an upgrade planner. If you have bots, just go ahead and create an upgrade planner like this. Now all you have to do is to pick up that planner and drag it all over your design, and then let the bots take care of the rest. And the same goes for your stone smelting design. Just like that. After the upgrade, the stone smelting design creates twice the amount that it did before, which is 15 items per second, or half a red belt. Before we upgrade our steel smelting design, let's take a look at how much we are producing per second. 3.3 steel plates per second. Alright, let's proceed with the upgrade. And let's do that again. And yes, we are producing twice that much steel, which is 6.6 steel plates per second. Now, as you can see, steel production is not that fast, but thankfully you also don't need that much in the early game. I have included a copy of this upgrade planner inside the blueprint book. Somewhere mid-game, you'll also get your hands on electric furnaces. At that time, you can come up with designs like this. Even though this design is not beaconized, it can still produce 1 full red belt of iron plates and copper plates. And of course, we need a stone smelting design as well, and the difference here is that this produces 1 full red belt of stone bricks. Finally, a beaconless design of electric furnaces that produce a lot of steel plates. As you remember, these furnaces work at the same speed as our steel furnaces, so we're still producing 6.6 steel plates per second. Time to talk late game. This is a design for iron and copper in the late game. As you can see, it is roughly twice the same design that we had for the red belt, so nothing complicated here. The only difference is this contraption right here in the middle. Let's see what this is about. As you can see, furnaces on first part of our array put their smelted iron plates on the far side of the belt. This becomes an issue halfway through the array because that side of the belt gets saturated or full. Using this simple contraption, we move them to the near side of the belt, so the far side is again empty for furnaces on the second group. These 2 designs are common ways to achieve this goal. First design uses a slight bend in the first part of the belt and transfers all the items into the near side. Second design looks a bit more sophisticated but takes less space, so you can use it for tight places. It uses a splitter with the filter set on something like a deconstruction planner. This makes sure all the items are transferred to the near side of the belt, in this case. This design uses the compact version because we don't have much space around here. Okay, time to see how much we are producing. 45 items per second or 1 full blue belt. Now all you need to do is to copy this and paste it as many times as you need. For example, let's quadruple it and see what happens. And now you have 4 full blue belts of copper plates, or 180 per second. At this point, you might be thinking, what the heck is this thing? It's a balancer, and it's a very useful thing. Let's talk about balancers for a second. Let's look at a very simple design. 2 belts going into somewhere. This could be a smelting array or anything, and then some sort of input. It could be a full belt of ores or something in between. It doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and connect this and see what happens. As you can see, we have a full belt of ores going on the first belt, but the second belt is empty. So if this is connected to a smelting array down here, all of those devices will be just idle. How do we fix this? Well, you can simply take one splitter, put it here, and there you go. What this splitter does is that it balances out this full belt here into 2 half belts here. This simple balancer makes sure whatever comes after it will be fed equally. equally. This concept might be a bit too weird for you right now, but it is a very useful concept when it comes to utilization of different assets. This is a 2x2 balancer. 2 belts in, 2 belts out. Now let's look at a 4x4 balancer. 4 belts in, 4 belts out. And you can safely ignore the middle part for now. Now let's see what happens if we connect these two inputs. As you can see, 2 full belts coming out and then a quarter of a full belt for each of the outputs. There are tons of different balancer designs on the internet. For example, this is an 8x8 balancer. Alright, enough talk about balancers. As you remember, we produce 180 items per second over here. Let's double this. And the way you do that is just copy and paste, and that's it. Now you need an 8-to-8 balancer to make this design work. Let's calculate our production rate here for a second. 360 plates per second. This is amazing. And of course, it would not be complete without the stone smelting design. Now let's move to very late game when you have your hands on beacons and modules. This is a beaconized design for iron and copper smelting. As you can see, it uses the simple bend in order to balance out the output belt. Each furnace is equipped with 2 productivity module 3, and we have 2 rows of beacons, each of them equipped with 2 speed module 3. Let's see how much we are producing per second. As you can see, we are not even consuming a full blue belt, and it's because of these productivity modules inside the smelters. So let's see how much we are producing on the output. Over 58 plates per second, and that's a lot of plates. The problem is, this blue belt do not have the throughput to get everything out in time. This means you can use the same design here with lower level modules like speed module 1 or productivity module 1, and it's still going to be okay. Again, feel free to copy paste this design as many times as you like. This is what happens if you copy paste it 4 times, and this is the 8 blue belt version of it.